is promoting, black is promoting a pawn there. And if white plays rook to a2, well, that would be very bad because of queen to b3. So maybe white has rook c8 there, but there's a huge amount to calculate. It's not at all like white is playing without risk. Let's see, rook c8, if a2, then rook to h8, king to g6, knight to f4, king to g7, and rook to d8. I think this wins for white.
Okay, I thought we had a mate that way, but yeah, we made this way.
f5, knight h5, and mate on g8. So yeah, it's dangerous for both. Black might end up with two queens. White might end up with
checkmate.
With checkmate.
Well, which is better?
Which is
two
better
queens
than two
or
queens.
checkmate?
Depends. One is rarer than the other.
One is rarer than the other. But, okay, a funny idea too. This isn't the aggressive version of it, but if that h5 pawn falls, there's a world where this rook has to give itself up for a pawn, and the position is still a draw.
Possibly, but in that case, black is the one who's playing for a win. Maybe white has a fortress because, well, especially if knight and bishop are traded, then it's just a draw. The rook on f4 is cemented, and black with the extra queen can't make any progress. With knight and bishop, that's a kind of unusual endgame, but not what Magnus wants for sure, to try to draw in a manner where he's down a queen and he holds a fortress, potentially.
Well, this is one of those positions where the eval bar may be hovering around 50-50 because the struggle is real, but that doesn't mean we're lacking fighting chess. This is what the people pay for. It's an unbalanced material exchange, two rooks for the queen, and then a battle as old as time, knight versus bishop.
And you know, we were just talking about a time trouble phase. And
time travel?
A time trouble phase.
Oh, yeah.
Time travel is for a different show. But it feels like just a few minutes ago they were down to seconds.
Yeah.
But you can already see the time trouble looming on the horizon.
It's amazing, yeah.
It happens very quickly. It's a complicated position, and it's easy to think here for half an hour on one position because it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're down to a few minutes again.
The time control on the other side does have increment for the record. So now that they have reached move, oh wait, no, increment doesn't have to move 60.
Move 60.
Right? Okay, I apologize. That's right. So the players are still playing with that sudden death dynamic, meaning 34 minutes is all that you have to reach move 60. 16 more moves still, but nevertheless, that's as Fabi said, we're already back in a position where Magnus has to at least be very aware of his clock.
Well, yeah, both of them do, because I can see Jan taking a significant amount of time at this moment, because bishop b4 is a very responsible decision. You are inviting white to directly attack your king with attack on the queen, check on the king, taking material in the process. So there's a lot to calculate here. Does he have other more useful moves than bishop to b4? I'm not sure if there's another way to deal with the threat of rook to d5.
Yeah, there's no way to stop it anyway, Robert.
And there's just some lines I was thinking about. Like, let's say bishop b4, and I go rook d4.
Ooh.
If I just stop a square short. My point is that knight takes h5 check is now a threat. And if you play queen to a4, what I'm starting to wonder here is after queen a4, can I play rook c2 to c4? And you go a2, I take on b4. And you'll take on, if you take on b4 here, you get your next queen, but I win h5, and there's no way black is ever winning that position.
Maybe white wins this position.
I think white should.
Yeah.
White probably slowly wins this one. Then knight comes back to f4. The f2 pawn will be defended by a king most likely, and white will just
put the rook on d4 first, king here to feel warm and cozy, put the pawn on h5, and then I'll figure it out later.
And the reason I bring this particular line up is because if white can give up a rook for the bishop and the pawn over there, only white can win that position.
Yep.
And white actually has quite good chances because of the isolated double pawns in the f-file, the isolated h5 pawn, and then the rook and knight can team up. And that's the thing, is we know a queen is better than a rook and knight in terms of point value. But what a rook and a knight can do that a queen can't is team up on a square. Mm-hmm. So a queen can attack one pawn, then white defends the pawn. You're not bringing anything else into the party. The rook and the knight can pile up pressure. So my rook d4 move was just trying to get, is a means to an end. But that's just something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind is there a time and a place where I can actually get rid of the bishop and the pawn and then try to win from there?
We have a move that was not bishop to b4 for the record. Queen a5, still inviting rook d5, but I guess with an idea of gaining a tempo on queen a4?
There are no back rank. The checkmates that Fabian was showing before, you can't quite reach because the bishop will cut off the last rank. So maybe that's a game-saving tempo in certain positions.
So we say rook d5, queen a4. Maybe you do your check thing. I go here, and your point is
It still looks very dangerous because can I play rook c8 here? I'm wondering.
yeah. Again, rook a2 is met by queen b3.
But wait, if you go rook c8, I have 8.
a2, rook takes f8.
Yeah, I'm not in time. All right.
You might have 2 queens, but I'm attacking you. This is the weirdest material balance I've ever seen. But rook h8, king g6, knight f4. We saw this sort of mating pattern, king g7, rook d8 before.
Right.
Isn't this still checkmate, regardless of the 2 queens or not?
So queen takes f4. No, then you lose, of course.
Then,
so.
well,
there's queen a2 at the
there's
end?
maybe queen a2.
Oh my goodness.
Black might, by a miracle, survive this one. But maybe not, because that king could actually hide. Like, let's say h5 here. King to g7, rook to d8. Queen takes f... No, the other rook to d8. Queen takes f2, king to h3. If queen to f1, king to h4. And queen h1, king to g4. I'm hiding from checks. Maybe not forever, but at least for now.
And h6 and f5 are threatened, by the way. That's mate.
And
Yeah, rook g8.
maybe black has f5 here, but who knows, yeah? If
You
he's
see that look from Jan, it was like a, whew, I'm glad I brought my thinking cap. That's what he's saying there. My handy dandy notebook and my man bun.
Well, we didn't see rook d5, unfortunately. That would have been fun to see, but we saw the slightly less active rook to a2. Now rook d5 is an obvious threat. Jan is playing so impressively quickly. It's actually amazing. Like, it looks super complicated, but he's moving. Each move takes a minute for him. That's kind of crazy.
Is he trying to put his bishop on b2 somehow? And just
Oh,
trap the rook on a2?
That would be a really interesting idea because that's not a position that allows the rook to give itself up for a bishop and
Yeah,
pawn.
I don't think you can coordinate it though.
It's too slow.
Well, like bishop c3.
Okay, so rook
Oh,
d5.
sorry, rook c2.
Oh, I was going to play rook d5.
Rook d5 also works. But I was saying just rook c2. Let's say I sit passively rather than going up the board. Like bishop c3. You're not really threatening a bishop b2 because I'll just take it with my c2 rook.
But here maybe white is happy to play knight e2.
Or-
And if bishop to e5. Because if bishop b2, we might get the same ending that we were talking about, right?
Yeah, you sack.
Bishop b2, rook cb2.
Well, didn't I have knight takes h5 instead of knight e2?
The queen.
Oh, that's true.
Oh, the queen has to guard the bishop. You did have that.
That's bad news for black. The king has to move somewhere. And then knight f4, and white basically picked up a pawn with the same or very similar position.
Right, because the point is bishop b2, I'm always taking it. The one thing
Yeah.
you need to be careful is if the queen can get to b4 and then you put a bishop on b2,
Yeah.
that would be problematic.
Yeah.
But how does black ever achieve that?
If the queen comes to b4 and bishop b2, there is no sacrifice, and the rooks have been excommunicated from each other. Okay. Wait, so bishop b4 is on the board. Magnus has 30 minutes to make another 15 moves.
Yeah, the choice is between, well, there is rook d to c2, there's rook d5, but there's also rook d3. That move does make sense.
Rook d3, I will go bishop c3, though,
You will probably play bishop to c3 there.
because then I'm
But
headed-
it's still knight h5 here. And then let's say king moves somewhere, f8
I don't
maybe.
care.
King h6, knight f4, sorry.
I want
Bishop
it all.
b2, and now we just have to get rid of that. But how do we get rid of that bishop?
The rook on
can't.
a2.
Like-
right? We were relying on all these rook c8 moves, right?
Rook to b3,
Okay,
Queen to d2.
queen to d2, king to g2. Now I'm threatening rook b takes a3. And if queen c1, if queen c2, there's rook takes a3. Either rook, I think.
I have queen c6 check. Okay.
Yeah, you'll check, but in the end you will have to take the rook, and we will end up with the position we said.
That looks
Okay.
bad.
And there's queen to c1,
Mhm.
maybe this is a problem.
So-
Starts to get a bit chaotic.
Yeah, like knight d3 is queen b1. But then rook
But
a.
then rook takes a3.
Oh, rook 3.
Very nice.
But knight d3, there's like queen to, first of all, there's start to be checks, but maybe queen c4, I'm wondering about. Queen c4, you can take on a3 again. Maybe you actually end up in this endgame,
That's what I'm aiming for.
which looks pretty sad for black to me.
Another position where only white can win.
Yeah, because from here, what white's going to do, and it might take a bit of time, is you want to put that rook on f4, like we talked about earlier, because then black has no threats. And then you try to maneuver your knight around. So maybe your knight has to go like to h3 to stabilize with your king on h2. Then you'll bring the rook over to the f4 square, and then you can keep going. White can play forever, and black is struggling.
Magnus played the move rook to d3. It's on the board.
That's a really instructive little exercise that Robert just did there for the viewers, quickly recognizing where your pieces are ideally placed, both to limit risk, like the rook on f4, and also to allow the most potential. I think it's what both sides are doing a lot of right now, especially Magnus. If he's already fantasizing about variations where he gives up the rook for a bishop and pawn, he would love a position like that with no risk, one that only he can win, and probably decent winning chances with the rook and knight versus the queen.
I think when there's a material imbalance, players can struggle with creating a new imbalance.
Yeah.
And for instance, there are times where one side's up in exchange, and you're